Kyler Murray, is he this season's Lamar Jackson?
Yes and no. I think he's this season's breakout player who's going to take it up 2 notches. Obviously, you get DeAndre Hopkins, a second year in not only in Cliff Kingsbury's system, but a second year for Cliff Kingsbury in the NFL. So I expect big things, but he's not going to be Lamar Jackson in the sense that Lamar Jackson was a late round draft pick last year. He was a guy that you could get in the double-digit rounds at times. Kyler, you're paying up for him. You're grabbing him in the 5th round, so the value won't return quite the same.
Yeah, and I expect him to break out, though. It's whether or not I'm going to take him in the 5th round, that remains to be seen, but so many things pointing up for Kyler Murray. Last year, only 3.7% of his attempts turned into a touchdown. That is a very low number when you're talking about quarterbacks who threw the ball 300 times. The average touchdown percent was 4.7. So, that's another 5-6 touchdowns off of what Kyler did last year. We've only seen 6 quarterbacks throw for over 3,500 yards and rush for over 500 yards. And that list now includes Kyler Murray. Like, he is the cheat code for fantasy quarterbacks is the ability to run. Now, we don't expect the 1,000-yard season on the ground from Kyler Murray, but I would anticipate a little bit more rushing. You saw him those first 2 weeks. He didn't run. He didn't run at all. Yeah, he was very hesitant to run at all. And then after that, he was, up in the 40 rushing yards a game or so, plus the Arizona Cardinals' natural high-paced offense, really strange inefficiencies in the red zone last year. So Kyler definitely could make that jump all the way up, in my opinion, to being number 2, or I guess if things bounce right, maybe he hits number 1 if he hits some astronomical touchdown rate. But I think that number 2 is within the range of outcomes for Kyler.
What about Kenyon Drake? Last year, he was acquired by from the Miami Dolphins, I should say. Had that monster game against the 49ers, played well down the stretch. Are we on the Kenyon Drake hype train this season?
All aboard! Let's go! Yes, I am definitely on the Kenyon Drake hype season. I have been a Kenyon Drake truther since he came out of college. Was just waiting for him to get the opportunity. It just so happens that it's also for our hometown team, which is fun. But the reality is the Arizona Cardinals, if you take whoever their number 1 running back was every single week last year because there were injuries with David Johnson, and you might not have known who it was when it was Chase Edmonds, but if you just take whoever it was each week and you look at the 16 games, that would have been the running back 3 for fantasy last year. And then what do they do? What are their actions? Well, they ship off David Johnson. They sign about
a $10 million transition tag.
$10 million transition tag for Drake. It's his show, and I think that he fits the scheme perfectly. He's going to dominate for fantasy. He's one of my favorite late first-round picks because I think he is worthy of being in that upper tier, but you can get him near the turn where you could pair him with another stud running back.
Yeah, he's got the 3-down skill set. We saw him utilized heavily in the receiving game, but that's what you want from your first-round picks. Like Derrick Henry, he's an anomaly. Like, he kind of gets a pass, but other than that, I want to make sure that my running backs are not game scripted out. They're down all of a sudden 14 points, and now my running back is pulled. That won't happen to Kenyon Drake. And people remember the end of the season for David Johnson, and that's how they think about him. But remember, that player was a top 12 running back 5 times in his first 6 games. So you put a player who's ready to go, who fits this system to the point that, like Jason was saying, they've made a lot of miracles happen to have Kenyon Drake be their starting running back. So I'm all aboard for Drake for fantasy.
And when you're talking about the end of the first round, he would probably be in a mix with players like Nick Chubb. We've seen Josh Jacobs rise over the last couple of weeks. We've seen Miles Sanders up there. Are you taking him ahead of those players?
I personally am. The players you just mentioned, they're all in the mix. I like all 3 of them, but Drake would be the number 1 off my board.
And it would be, depends on how I'm feeling that day. That clump of running backs is just so close to me. Scoring format would matter a really large deal when I'm breaking those guys apart. But I'll probably take Jacobs before Drake, but I'll take Drake before the other guys you'd mentioned.
Yeah, and it's so funny you mentioned that because when you're doing mock drafts and stuff, you always try like combinations. You're like, some days I want
Right.
Drake, other days I want, Nick Chubb. It's kind of like going to Del Taco or whatever. You're like, sometimes, I'm just going to get a trio of tacos. Maybe I want a quesadilla. You never know. Just surprise me that day.
Well,
But what
Del
about-
Taco, you get the chicken tacos every single time, Rick. What are you doing?
Are you kidding me? Over a Del Beef burrito? Now you're starting. Okay, listen, I love your fantasy knowledge, but you don't walk into my place right here and start besmirching my order at Del Taco. That's where I'm going to have to draw the line.
I was just saying it was bad. That's all.
Yeah, well, we weren't besmirching. And honestly, I don't usually agree with Mike's food take, but he is right.
How
He is
dare
correct
you?
here. I mean,
I'm not. Listen now. I'm afraid to take you to Portillo's when I come to town. This is now starting to get. This is careening into another area. I don't want to go into because I want to talk about DeAndre Hopkins. Now he's obviously one of the best receivers in the game. To everybody outside of Bill O'Brien, I should say, where do you see him falling in drafts?
Hopkins, I've got him as my number 5 wide receiver. I think he should be able to be great. I'm not drafting him. We talked about that on our podcast recently in the sense that he's a guy who's been averaging 166 targets a game over the last 5-6 seasons. He's not getting that in Arizona, even with a faster pace of play. With Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk passing to the running back, the team is happy with year 2 Andy Isabella. I just don't think he's going to have the same target market share. And the real issue here, it's not that Hopkins can't dominate for the Cardinals. It's that he's being drafted as a guarantee that he is going to dominate. And there are gigantic question marks here. When you're talking about a new team, a new scheme, shortened offseason, new coach, everything is different for Hopkins. He's still great. He's going to be the lead guy here. Like I said, I've got him ranked as my wide receiver 5, but he carries risk, and that's why you can't just go by linear rankings. You have to have some context, break it down into tiers, say who in this group of players has more or less risk. And I don't trust that Hopkins will have enough targets to guarantee the domination.
Yeah, he's being drafted like nothing changed for him. That he's still in Houston with Deshaun Watson, with that built-in connection, he is the absolute unquestioned number 1. Now, he's the number 1 for Arizona, but when you have 5 wide receivers on the field, will 30% of the targets really make their way over to DeAndre Hopkins? Yes, it can happen. But historically, we don't have a ton of these like full apex elite wide receivers changing teams when they're in their prime. But when we've had that and they're drafted as a top 10 wide receiver, historically, things have not worked out. Now, Hopkins certainly could be the exception to this, but I'm with Jason that I want Hopkins on my team. This is my hometown Cardinals. I want to root for Hopkins, but the players that are going right around him, it's really, really tough for me to draft Hopkins right now.